Good afternoon, everyone. I am Professor Kimi Pekpo, and I'm delighted and honored to have this opportunity to introduce you to the aesthetic fact. It may seem like a strange way to approach post-truth, but Whitehead's preference for aesthetic delight over brutal fact offers some very original insights into how judgments are made. The existence of imaginative literature should have warned logicians that their narrow doctrine is absurd, he argues. It is difficult to believe that all logicians commence by judging whether the initial proposition be true or false. Surely at some point in the reading, judgment is eclipsed by aesthetic delight, a mere lure for feeling. In the contemporary context, Whitehead provides an intuitive grasp of the workings of present-day fictioning machines. Whitehead specifically referred to an audience's joy on experiencing a particular imaginative actor reading Shakespeare's To Be or Not to Be speech from Hamlet. But this could in effect imply an experience of an affecting piece of art, a novel, a painting, or installation. The effect of the art elicits a very different kind of measure of fact. It appeals to an audience on an aesthetic register of experience, occasioning what Whitehead would call a value based on elements in feeling. This notion of feeling is not, as logical positivists would have it, opposed to fact. Feelings are not a personal or irrational felt experience. Feeling instead acts like a powerful, impersonal lure that draws an audience into the delightful experience of the fact. What is at once peculiar and fascinating about this Whitehead's feeling measure of fact is that he is the famed co-author of the Principia Mathematica, a book that attempted to redefine the fundamentals of pure logic. So one might assume that if Whitehead were around today, he would perhaps take a decidedly logical position on post-truth. He might even self-identify with present-day logical positivists who continue to grasp post-truth as a preferential problem of appealing to irrational feelings, personal beliefs, or cherry-picked desires rather than a necessary commitment to brutal fact. But no. Whitehead's speculative philosophy would look to problematize the logician's brutalist grip on fact.
Shakespeare and the unfamiliarity of his use of language returns us to the state of immanence, where we feel intensities outside of those that we can datify, and yet we continue to be impressed by our own ability to explain ourselves away scientifically. And why, we ask, is immanence even worth seeking? Is the truth in the emergence prior to the enlightened quest for a coordinated categorization of a simple truth abstracted from connectedness?
He argued against the imposition of mathematical abstractions, e.g. points and grids, on nature, arguing instead for a kind of radical empiricism wherein nature was experienced through the abstractions of sense data.
And why is immanence worth seeking? Is the truth in the emergence prior to the coordinated categorization?
Feelings for Whitehead are broadly conceived of, but they are certainly not regarded at any level as mere interferences in the processes of reasoning. Speculative philosophy would also loosen the status of truth and falsity as distinct counterparts at the polar ends of a spectrum. It purposefully challenges the positivistic distinction made between brutal fact and untrustworthy felt experiences by arguing for a measurement of fact that founded on the intensity of experience, gauged as something he goes on to call the aesthetic fact. These are spectral experiences that appear to move beyond the polar extremes of brutal fact on one hand and irrational, emotional, and illogical reasoning on the other. To be sure, the speculative nature of spectral experiences is indeed to unshackle the dominant grip of brutal fact as a force opposed to visceral registers of experience. On the spectra of experience, the often forced distinction made between exact truth and falsity collapses into moments of indistinction. This does not mean that we have to deny that things can be either true or false. However, making clear distinctions between statements, as Whitehead notes, generally refuses to be pushed to a meticulous exactness. The diagram of spectral experience is designed to problematize conventional distinctions made between fact, fake, and feeling, which have been used to justify opposing positions on the post-truth debate. Here we find a distinct impasse. On one hand, positivists point to the untrustworthy nature of subjective feelings, belief, and desires as causal actors in contagions of fake news. Personal emotional responses are often regarded as the polar opposite of objective rational judgments about what is fact or fake. Rationalists who continue a cognitive theoretical frame similarly tend to relegate personal feelings to a marginal status in their analogical grasping of brains and computers. On the other hand, postmodernists have continued to position fact itself as an imploding reality effect, floating around on an illusory representational plane. This is not fact as it is opposed to feeling, but rather fact as it might appear in Wonderland, down a rabbit hole. These are intensive movements of speculative contagion.
It means that your order has been dispatched. If you are watching this, then I am sorry to have to tell you that we have all gone home, and you have missed the boat. This film of me speaking to you was left on the shores to distract anyone not chosen to follow us back to the planet Utopion.
Rabbit hole. These are intensive movements of speculative contagion that produce what Gabriel Todd calls modes of sleepwalking subjectivity. Indeed, although the feelings of individual consciousness and an associated sense of personal volition might seem to provide a centered command post of experience, the aesthetic fact is experienced as a mere foothold a sleepwalker has in the speculative spreading of a shock event. Ultimately, the strangest, most rewarding factor of Whitehead's aesthetic ontology is the revelation that the lure of feeling is impersonal. Like this, sleepwalkers are caught in the shock waves of the event, which lures them, feels them, and carries them along on a flux. Indeed, it is not the truth-seeking subject that decides these encounters with shock events. On the contrary, it is the aesthetic of the event itself, its capacity to lure and feel, which decides how subjects are made. And why is immanence worth seeking?